Hey, we're live. It's the H.454 Conference Committee on May, what is it? 27th?
28th.
28th.
Flies.
9 in the morning. So I think the goal for this morning was just to ask each side to ask the other questions about why they chose to do what in the bill. So
I was kind of thinking we might begin, since we've all been before your committees explaining our version of the bill. And we might just through and ask for some of the parts of your bill.
For you to explain your amendments.
Yeah.
moving up to side by side, or how are you doing it?
I think the side by side seems like the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so perhaps it's easiest for you all to just sort of go through the yellow portions and just provide some explanation and whatnot for our benefit.
I think page 4 is the first yellow.
And the part about the healthcare costs on the education fund, we had actually originally done that as a task of the task force. It got moved to here to look at the impact of healthcare costs on the education fund. Clearly a driver. And then just how to vote, it's kind of self-explanatory. I think that the first one.
So I know that was discussed by the Ed Finance Subcommittee of the task force. Is that what it's called? The commission? Thank you. And so I'm curious about why the task force versus the commission versus sort of who's qualified to be analyzing healthcare costs.
I'm not sure it was necessary. Well, it's not to analyze the healthcare system. It's just to analyze the impact on the education costs. So it's on that level, it's not even all that complicated.
Okay. And then the removal of the 9 non-voting members.
Where are we with that? Where is this? I'll do this. Yeah, I know. I forgot. I'm just trying to remember that. We'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure why.
Well, is it the differences between the a sort of a standalone redistricting task force versus
Yes. Yes.
we put it under the
That's
the subcommittee of the commission, large, in large part to coordinate the work of the commission's public engagement process.
so you had them in for. So why did you have it the way you had it?
We had it for two main reasons. We had them under the commission because the commission is embarking on a public engagement process that's, structured, facilitated by professionals, trying to reach all voices of Vermont, and felt that when it comes to doing something as major as this sort of redistricting work, it was a perfect tie-in, a perfect opportunity to have those two sort of go together, so that the question of what should a future sort of district in Vermont look like can be put out to the public. And the other main reason was because there was a budget. The Commission on the Future of Public Education had about $50,000 available in an appropriation that has been kicking around for a couple of years now.
And so to not be duplicative of budgets or efforts.
Do we know if there's money left in their budget
Yes, it's about $50,000.
after even hiring the engagement person?
Yeah, we were talking about that in one of the commission meetings just recently.
Did you talk to them? Because they're dependent on the Department of Education for staffing.
Did I talk to who?
The commission about their ability to do this.
The proposal as we created it essentially sets up a very similar group of people.
Within the commission.
But it's sort of as a non-voting subcommittee of the commission. So it's not the commission, but it has no sort of control or work or dealing with it.
The commission, I've noticed the difference being on the commission of not having the services of our ledge council or joint fiscal office, that by making this a non-legislative group, I'm wondering if the Department of Education has the ability to staff this.
Yeah,
Did you make it a legislative group?
right. I'm not sure if you made it the legislative group either, but you
Yeah.
definitely resourced it well.
Okay. I think I just sort of to further clarify what you said, I think an important differentiation is that it's within the commission, but it doesn't need to be, nothing it does needs to be approved by the commission. It's standalone from, it's just coordinating. So where the Ed Finance Subcommittee then had to sort of, everything had to be relitigated by the commission afterwards. That is not how this is set up, which I think is an important difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the differences here are very
Minor.
The makeup of both groups is fairly similar. I have to tweak a few things just because there is no executive director of the Association of School Business Officers. Just a few other minor points. But yeah, no complaints about the appropriation that goes with it, and I think we could probably figure this one out so that the work of the commission and the work of this task force as proposed by the Senate could probably be strongly tied together.
I think the Senate position was to make it more direct rather than have the subcommittee.
And this, the inclusion of community engagement, is there anything, I feel like it stands for itself, but is there just anything you want to say about why you included that?
I think the next major section is section 3A, which is the transitional school boards. Maybe we can talk a bit about that. How you see their role. And I think our position on this was really that this is part of chapter 2. We don't have anything in ours about the new boards moving forward. I figured that was work for next year. We design the new districts.
I think this was just an attempt to get as far as we could and so people know what's coming. And the transitional school board work here, I think actually works. Having somebody appointed and the districts can be well ahead of the time that the foundation formula actually hits and ready to go.
I think some of our concerns with this is that unlike the Act 46 mergers where we were largely creating supervisory districts out of supervisory unions that were already somewhat one and the same, we're creating much larger new districts here. And we are giving this group some pretty significant powers. And this is an unelected group, probably the most important, which is hiring a superintendent. As well as setting the budget, which really seems to me should be a job of an elected school board. So that concerns me. Within this, I guess I continue to think this is probably something we should tackle next year. That being said, I do agree that there's a role for a group here, especially as we start talking about like what is a new district going to look like? Like where's central office going to be? Not necessarily who, but what positions are going to be created so that people moving forward kind of know the status of their futures.
So I guess I'm wondering the duties that you gave that transitional board, if you sort of what the thinking is behind that.
I think it really was just to get to the point that the districts are ready to go and then an elected board steps in and the pieces that have to get done in order to keep the wheels turning are in place. And otherwise the wheels can't turn. And it's going to be hard to do it all at once without a transition.
Yeah, I would fully agree that there needs to be some sort of transitional.
I think this is actually, I think it's actually fairly well thought through. It will work. If we went with this model, I think this does work.
This is really largely the Act 46 model.
Yeah.
But again, Act 46 versus what we are talking about in the future state are a bit different. And again, this is imbuing an unelected board with some pretty significant powers. So, yeah.
Just the timeline of trying to create wards, I don't know if it's realistic to put that on a task force with everything that goes behind that, to try to have it done on the timeline that's be up against.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of forgot about that. You know, the process of creating voting wards for large school districts, I would say, is probably not something that can be handled by essentially a group of volunteers. When you think about what it takes to redistrict a Senate district today and all the hearings, all the meetings, and you have GovOps committees working on nothing else besides redistricting.
Well, how would you get it up and running then? Because the way that I think what this envisions is not having it done by wards by the legislature and allowing districts to do it differently, have different models across the state.
Yeah. So, I think the way I would envision this is that it's a job of the legislature to create these districts, number one, which we know, but then to create equitable voting in the same way we create equitable constitutionally valid voting today is a legislative role and a complicated one. Drawing wards that we've heard lots of testimony about what a hard, complicated process, because anytime you move one line a little bit, it has an impact on the distribution of voters.
But my guess is, my sense is that districts would probably want to have the power to do this and have the ability to do it differently and not have it, the wards or something, different districts around Vermont right now are set up differently and they have different systems that work.
I think it takes a tremendous amount of legal expertise to do something at this sort of constitutional scale legally and well. And I think that's a lot to turn over to those boards. And we haven't talked process-wise about what kind of witnesses we might want to bring to the Committee of Conference. But the Secretary of State's office might have some ideas about sort of what might be appropriate roles for this interim board and what might be more appropriate roles for the legislature and sort of within a constitutional framework.
Yeah, but they've done that already. They've done that. A lot of these districts have done just what we're talking about right now on their own with assistance, obviously, of legal analysis to be able to, and they've done it differently. And I think I think the goal here is not to have it be one size fits all and to allow districts to do it differently. They obviously have to meet tests in order for it to work, but they're capable of figuring that out. It's not that there's a challenge. It's not that it's not difficult, but
there's no they to ask yet because we haven't created these districts and said to a group of volunteers, would you like to have this task? Well, and I guess I'm concerned if every district has its own way of of having representation, then we sort of lose the idea of kind of a statewide cohesion and how we govern our schools. And I, creating voting districts as we have now has been fairly simple because we've just largely taken SUs and created SDs out of them. When we start combining, multiple large current districts into a much larger geographic area, sort of the one person, one vote constitutionality is going to be extremely important that we adhere to.
Of course it is.
But if we start having, well, we're going to use a hybrid modified at large versus at large, whatever. I don't know. I'd rather see a sort of a statewide model so that all districts are governed in the same way.
I think we've noted that this is an area of
Yeah.
significant
Yeah.
disagreement.
Yeah.
Mhm. And we could,
And that might be worth having somebody,
Yeah.
school board association ask if this is the kind of task a school board to quickly handle.
Well, I know that, just by way of example, my school board they did it differently. And they're set up and they're very much interested in being able to maintain something like the model they have now, because it really works. So I'm just always, and I think the notion here is that doing all of these as one size fits all is not necessarily going to produce the best results. So,
Senator Baumgart, what process would you like to use for us thinking about bringing in non-staff witnesses into this group?
well, I think we just agree on who we want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk about that at the end of this meeting.
If I could go back to the commission, as I read and I think it's school closure, I think the commission is to recommend a process for how to include community in the conversation over whether a school would close. Are there any other protections in the House version
What do you mean by protection?
for a small town that wants to weigh in on whether or not their small school or their local school remains open or not? I see the pieces in here about class size, that there's that could force something down the road, but is there any kind of protection in here, where the electorate of that town or any other would have a say in?
There isn't, in the sense that these districts and how they're chartered, or whatever word you want to use, none of that exists yet. And that's probably going to be part of that larger chartering discussion. So in other words, if we create 15 school districts across the state or 20 school districts across the state, they're going to need a governing document, which testimony that we have had has said a charter given by the legislature is probably the best route to go. Okay. And so just the way articles of agreement today look, those sorts of things would be part of that chartering discussion.
I wonder if I could offer a second process suggestion. And our committee talked about this when we were going through your amendment. I think we've sort of in the House acknowledged through this process that this bill is step one, right? And not just like we pass it and then step 2 and 3 and 4 are done by people other than us, that we are going to need to probably spend this same amount of energy next year.
Saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's great. Okay. And so for certain things, if we could just, be able to say like, that's for next year's bill and then set it aside, I think that might ease our journey through some of this. And so what I heard you say, Representative Conlon, is like, that's a chapter 2, that's a year 2 decision.
Okay. Something that I think is more specific in here that's not year 2. I'm looking at section 8, which is the prohibition on school closure and transitioning to paying tuition. And I think this is in both versions of the bill, but
Where are you?
Section 8,
On page, sorry,
it starts on page 16 of the side by side.
thank you.
The language in here seems to indicate to me that if there's a partially operating school district right now, that if they closed a public school for their operating side of the district, that would block them from tuitioning their resident students to, but is it all of its students? It kind of reads to me like it would be all of its students, not just the students that attended the public school. So I don't know what your intent is there.
I'm curious about, I'm concerned that if we spend time on areas of the bill that we don't have disagreement, that we're never gonna get anywhere in our conference.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just
Okay.
trying to understand what your intent there is.
So the intent was, it's hard to speak for everybody, but I think the intent was to talk about when those portions that operate, if they become non-operating, not sort of affecting those grades that have previously existed. It's a good question, and we probably need to
Okay.
give a little ledge council time and tweak that.
Maybe the language.
Yeah.
Where were,
So we were just at, we had hit average class size minimums. I don't think we need to necessarily, these are so close. Really, I think what for our benefit is to sort of to ask you about the decisions that you made on these. We don't spend a lot of time on this because the numbers are so close anyway. Yeah.
Can I just, did you guys give any thought to, as far as whether, class sizes would become an enforcement tool? Only to like, basically, if a district, it is not using supplemental spending, if they're doing it on their EOP, to just maybe leave them alone and say, you're doing it with the money the state's giving you, and you're not using supplemental, and just kind of give the district a pass on these ideas? Did you guys have any conversations along those lines,
Or
or?
did not take it that far.
Okay, thank you.
do you have any explanation on the sort of tiny tweaks there on numbers?
I think the idea was just to have them be a little bit less onerous, and for thinking about rural districts. And that's kind of the answer.
And that
A
would be the same
a
for.
little bit less onerous.
And I think that's the same answer for page 15, the two tweaks there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
We did a lot of talking about empirically derived when we did weights and base. Is there any empirically derived information on class sizes? That might be some of the testimony we'd like to get.
I mean, when you change the class sizes, did you change them based on any evidence from the field or?
I think it was more to make it a little bit less onerous.
When we did ours, we got testimony talking about what were about numbers, and then sort of, there were a number of different pieces of research that I would say we then sort of blended together to write the numbers we had, but it was all based on research that we've been provided with.
Probably research to, yeah.
I wonder if Danny could send that research to the students.
There's the class size minimum testimony that we had from largely the BSA.
What's this difference on rural? On page 15, like 3 consecutive school years instead of 2 consecutive.
You were 2 and the Senate was 3, is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's part of the less onerous.
Your
Okay,
your
great.
shall were
Okay,
many.
cool.
Yeah.
So probably one of the big ones is under section 6, your removal of something that both the governor and we had in our proposal, having the AOE develop, or the state board with AOE develop graduation requirements.
I think for us was in part that we took no testimony. Just didn't have time to take testimony. We haven't, so we didn't really reach the conclusion that uniform graduation requirements were warranted. So I think that's one we just wanted to wait till next year. Can actually take some testing.
And when does that do in the House version?
It was for, it'll take effect in 27-28 school year, for the president of the 2031. Yeah.
And so if that decision waited till next year, would that need to? Would the implementation timeline need to move out?
Well, we have on or before August 1st, 2026, State Board of Education shall initiate rulemaking. That's for the independent schools. And 2026, that's class size minimums. Oh, I'm sorry, on or before July 1st, 2027, shall adopt statewide.
We've gotten along for a long time without them, so probably okay for another.
Have we? That's why we're here today, right? No questions?
You all pulled the school size intent language. There was no, it was just intent language. There was no, just to say that that's the goal of the state. There was no teeth behind it because we don't have a school construction program.
So why do you take the intent out?
I think just, again, we weren't able to take a ton of testimony about school size. I think we're also wanting to be careful that there will be instances where small schools as niche players continue to make sense. And so we just weren't ready to take that leap yet. You know, you do, as you know, we have half the time to take testimony, but so we kind of, where we could really focus testimony, we did, and where it wasn't critical to get it to go through, we left it for next year.
Okay. You know, talk a little bit about the language on 17.
I think the intent here was there are just areas of the state that the rural, we took one place we did take a lot of testimony was from Essex County in particular. And about their reliance on just ability for kids to go to different schools depending on their geography. And so we wanted to be careful that we weren't forcing somebody to drive around a school to get to another one, if that really didn't make sense. So we wanted to have some ability to make it possible for kids to go to an independent school if that's what truly made sense, rather than just say it has to be, because that geography up there is we took a lot of testimony about this as a real challenge.
So that puts us through school construction, no changes. Over to 19. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the change from the governor's and our proposal, the 51%, to the language that you have in here.
Yeah, so the language that what we did was, rather than just accept kind of a blunt instrument of the 51%, we thought about it differently. And we thought about areas of the state where independence was a integral to the delivery system. And therefore developed the two-part test. Because if you have a school that's in an area that's fully operating, it's probably not integral to the delivery systems. We put that as the first part of the test. And then it's a matter of, certainly a school that has, for instance, 49% of its kids is integral to the delivery system. It's not 51, it's not 49. And so we think 25 is a much more reasonable number. And if a school has less than 25, it's probably, somewhere you just have to pick a number. And 25 was actually, some ways there were people who didn't want to go that high, make it that, but 25 does seem like a number that if its school has, from an area has 25% of its kids, it's probably integral to the system. So that's it.
It's interesting because 25% of 12 kids is super different than 25% of 600 kids. And I mean, such as math, but it's just sort of like when I run both those scenarios in my head, they say something so different to me, you know?
I'd say, one, I have sort of two concerns. One, I just need to talk with Ledge Council about sort of the language that's the most language that's been yellow in terms of almost fearful that you'd be actually eliminating some independent schools. Don't intend to by saying supervisory unions in this case, but that's just a technical question. Under letter D, you talked about 25% of its Vermont resident student enrollment. So I do think of, as Emily said, if you are a school that largely caters to out-of-state students and you have 6 Vermont students in that group of 75, and 25% of that is, a very small number, but that's a very small number within an actual very large class. And I'm not quite sure if that meets the test of being integral.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any, schools like that have a.
Oh, I think there are.
I think probably Steve Academies.
Technical schools probably like that.
It's not about Vermont.
Probably like that.
It's also about Vermont kids. It's not about whether those out-of-state kids or not. It's about Vermont kids. So that's why we did it that way.
Calendar, evaluation requirements, we talked about that.
Well, we didn't talk about calendar.
Oh, sorry.
Was that another, didn't take any testimony, so they've already pulled it?
Yeah.
And that was in the administration's proposal
It
too?
was.
Okay.
Like
I don't know how much you all spent with the administration's proposals, given that we had already sort of worked through them when it all arrived with you.
We certainly we had Secretary Saunderson several times.
plus we had joint testimony. in the
Oh,
early
we
days.
did.
Yeah, we had a lot of.
Yeah, I guess we did a lot of work together
Yeah.
in the early days.
Yeah. Actually, we'll try till the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a flag that I think we spent less time with the appropriations language because it wasn't available when the bill was on our side. So I'm gonna need to take some time with JFO to just understand it better. Not flagging concerns, just that I never saw it.
So with that being said, that probably brings us up to page 26, section 33.
You know,
And the AOE positions, I just can't remember what the AOE actually proposed for additional staffing. If this is in line with that.
yeah, we'll have to look at that together.
I don't believe the AOE's was limited service. Again, we'd have to look at that.
Right. Question of that.
Is there a final appropriations memo request from AOE that we could see?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll look and see what we got for testimony.
I shouldn't say that because maybe there was.
Yeah, it's just-
Maybe there was one in the protections. And I know that was roughly the number.
Okay.
And there may actually have been something with the pros.
whatever you define. Because
But it's still like,
It takes a little.
Annie will take a look at that for that document.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, so that brings us up to sparsity.
So your language read what?
I want to, we sort of realized a problem with our language the day before we passed it out, and it was too late to start messing with it. I think there's a lot that's very useful with your language, and I do think we need to explore the zip code issue a little bit.
Yeah. And
Further?
we knew that was,
But and I'm fairly sure the zip code doesn't work, but I think the rest of the construct works, and I think we can figure that out.
the Montpelier zip code includes the entire town of Middlesex. Montpelier is not sparse, Middlesex probably is.
And Julia spent some time with the GIS office talking about that.
we actually, there's an issue with.
Yeah, great.
Milton
Okay.
Georgia does the same.
Yes,
Sure.
that's very common.
And there's actually some really amazing testimony from Rebecca Samaroff related to local option taxes and zip codes. That's a pleasure to behold that testimony. Some of my favorite. Okay.
So that pretty much brings us up to page 30.
I think though, just to touch base on it, not that the zip code is necessarily the right, it's proxy. But
Yeah.
the point was that a district can also create situations that don't really make sense. They can.
Yeah, applying to the school makes much more sense.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very agreed on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. And so I really like your construct. I just want to find a different proxy. We have 15 minutes left. We're about to hit foundation formula. I guess What?
Taking pause and figure out.
I don't know, pause and figure it out and talk about witnesses a little bit. Yeah. I sort of a small question about it feels like you're restudying stuff we just studied, but you're also studying some new stuff. And I wonder if you're open to just studying the new stuff and not restudying the old stuff.
We can talk about that.
Okay.
Like, section by section.
So who do we want to hear from for more information?
Well, I think probably the Secretary of State's office would be good to just talk about, or frankly, ledge council, whichever ledge council is best for us on, sort of letting districts do their own thing, or, having a sort of standard system of wards and boards, but also I'm more interested in just how you go about doing that, and is it something that a volunteer board is capable of doing?
So you were thinking School Boards Association and then either the Secretary of State or the Ledge Council?
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably Secretary of State.
we had, for what it's worth, division guidance documents. And also recognizing the fact that they've done it already. In some instances, they've done it already, so they can do it. It's challenging, but
And then,
I guess I'm going to disagree. I don't know of any school district that's on voting boards as opposed to just maintained town voting the way they always have.
oh, yeah, my point was only they do it different. They have done it differently around the state. And they have set up a system that meets the one person, one vote. And I think we weren't convinced yet that it must be wards. Because that will in part depend on what the map looks like in the end.
yeah,
Yeah, I think, one of the fears that you'll hear from rural areas is that when you have a concentration of people that can turn into a concentration of power, you aren't equitably dividing up the vote. And if you leave it up to that concentration of power to decide how you're going to divide up the vote, that inequity could continue.
Are there other folks we want to hear from on the sections we've covered already or sections we know?
I'd just like a little time, and I actually doesn't need to happen in front of the committee, but just about the 25% language portion, more not the 25% number, but the wording above it. And it's not a question that I just need it better.
Okay, so you're going to work with
Condition.
Steph on that.
Yeah.
I want to spend a little more time on the appropriations language on my own. GIS office on zip codes, is that useful, or do we all agree that zip codes don't work and we want to?
I think everybody knows that codes are
Okay,
a proxy for,
okay.
they knows they need some work or something to get to this idea.
I'm happy to bring another proxy to the group and find the right person to come talk about that. Does that
Yeah.
sound good?
Great.
Okay. Anyone else we want to hear from? And then. So what should we be doing at 2:00?
Continuing on.
Continuing on same mode? Okay,
Because we're getting into the complicated stuff.
okay. And lots of Julia will be helping us talk through that? Yeah. Okay. Great. And I don't want to entirely defer to Julia, because I'm curious to hear your thinking on the decisions.
Is it okay if we have Annie try to schedule somebody from the Secretary of State's office for 9 tomorrow?
Yeah.
Does that work for folks?
Yeah.
Or anywhere within our schedule tomorrow that they can do?
We've had a,
It's now our room, by the way.
Yes.
Okay.
no, it'll be used for other, Annie's shaking her head behind you. It'll be used for other meetings when we're not meeting.
Right, yeah, we can't leave.
Okay, can't wait, okay.
I mean, we could probably leave it in like a pile in.
But we'll come
But
back.
not-
Yeah.
Yes, this is where we'll be for all these meetings though. No.
When you're ready to go online, I would like to talk to you all.
Okay, great. And then we've had a request to be setting up a third meeting each day. And so I wonder if we want to pick a time for that now.
We're here to work.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I
Okay.
don't, are you on the floor at 3?
Yeah, so maybe we should gather again at 4 each day.
Let's shoot for that.
Okay.
if you-
So
I think we could also maybe go through
Right.
like after 2. I don't know if we need to go to the floor or not. So,
Yeah, I
so
don't.
sometimes we'll work straight through and sometimes we'll do 2 and 4.
So it's kind of working straight through unless we get interrupted by 4. So-
Okay.
Yeah.
Interrupted by 4. Okay.
Okay.